Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Fabio Pano. I'm based at University of Leicester in UK, and so it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here in this very wonderful and stimulating environment, but also here to kick off the inaugural workshop for Synopsys, which I think, but you will judge by yourself, is a very, very interesting initiative. So before I move on, if there is any issue from people online, just drop a message. Otherwise, I'll carry on. It means that from the technical viewpoint, we are fine. Okay, so today I will try to tell you a little bit more about our endeavor. But before doing so, before we move on, let me just give you an obvious, I think, usually an obvious caveat. So what I'm trying to discuss with you, introduce with you, will be obviously very much interdisciplinary. But as you may imagine, I come from a particular disciplinary domain. I'm an economist, just an economist, to a certain extent also with some issues in terms of identity. For some economists, people who do precision guesswork based on reliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. So I don't know if you're among those, but hopefully by the end of the presentation, we might get a little bit more understanding of what we are trying to do and perhaps also what economists can contribute to the discussion in meta science. So obviously I will, during the presentation, venture in less familiar territories. So, go time to time away from economics, entering in other social sciences in particular. But as always, this will be my partial perspective, so I don't have any ambition to be exhaustive in what I'm saying. And I'll be happy to take questions as we go along and discuss with you and try to understand together where we are aiming. Okay, so why are we here? So we are here to kick off Synopsys, which is a new European-founded research group specializing in economics of science. And this is a new initiative, a burgeoning center in meta research, and it aims at bringing together researchers also locally in Cyprus within the university, but also beyond, create links at international level, with Europe in particular, but not just. So why, I started by saying that this, I think, is a fascinating initiative. Well, let's try to understand, hopefully together, a little bit more. Yeah. So I will try to discuss why such initiative is topical and important by discussing what are the challenges in doing science. Then I will try to talk a little bit about the what. So what is meta research? In a way, the science of doing science. And then I will, start discussing the how. So, beginning with some small steps, examples from my own research, and try to, sketch the direction of travel, where we want to go, where we can go, in terms of, a longer horizon, a long march. And so this is roughly also the outline of the talk. And let's, start from the first point, the why. So doing science and its challenging, I think, many of us in the room have tried really to do science, and I'm sure we have come across several challenges, obviously from more of a philosophical viewpoint, what do we do when we do science? Well, we try to discover the truth, the underlying phenomena in the world around us. And the reason why we want to understand is obviously, because it's interesting on its own, but also it may have practical implications, and in particular for many social science and economics. Among those, we want to be able to make predictions, so understand how things will go later down the line and affect the environment, so shape it, try to improve, hopefully, the status quo. And this happens, often when we are able as scientists, together with other stakeholders, practitioners, and policymakers, we're able to translate these scientific insights in policies. And when we're looking at larger communities or even countries, when we move from small studies to large-scale studies, to large-scale rollout, to large-scale interventions. So, in a way, when we do science, we try to understand more the environment, how it works, the dynamics, the underlying causes, but ultimately is to affect it, right? So now the clicker is working. That's good to know. Okay, so why? So these are obviously often part of the ideas of doing science. So what we would like to do, but sometimes we need to keep both feet on the ground, and those ideas not always translate in scientific practices. And there are many reasons why this is the case. Obviously, at least I experienced many limitations, both in my activity, in my knowledge, and so on. And so sometimes, even my practices as a scholar is not as close as I would like to the scientific ideas. And this might happen for a number of reasons. On this slide, I put some examples. It's not exhaustive. And so clearly there might be distortions in how the knowledge system is structured. For instance, we know that there is, in particular in certain countries, but this is becoming more and more, the prevalent culture across the world, at least the Western now. There's a culture in academia of publishing or perish, so it's the importance on obtaining good publications. There is clear artificial scarcity, so in particular in the area where we could move to, for instance, online journals and so on, there is not really a reason why, a concrete reason why we should keep scarcity, but still journals endorse some form of scarcity that has all the implications and create distortion in the knowledge system. That's also the case due to rivalries. So we have, different academic tribes that often might, generate conflict, which not always are at the service of the accumulation of knowledge. We have heard these, so there might be key first movers in our profession that set the stage, and then the incentives are such that many other not so prominent scholars or not in position of prominence will follow the lead. And in doing science, there's a lot of uncertainty, so we don't know really what's the value of a scientific contribution unless we wait a given amount of time and we assess, and we probe the findings. So, often to contrast this uncertainty, there is an attitude of branding, and this is particularly relevant when we talk about top journals. In economics, there is the classic top 5 tyranny. So it's top 5 journals that are considered, la creme de la creme of publications. But there are similar situations in other disciplines. In political science, we have a top 3, even faster perhaps, and so on. In other sciences. So those journals also exert the role of branding. They put a stamp on the research, saying, that's a very good research. This, should lower the perceived uncertainty about the value of the research. But that's not just, all elements, and this is just, a set of examples of how the knowledge system may be affected by possible distortions, and therefore we might move away from scientific ideas when we are doing scientific work. But there are other possible departures, and for instance, this is another example. There are sometimes paths to scholarly independence, and this takes the various forms. Some of us might have experiences with editors or founders, and I remember in economics when this paper was published, it created quite a lot of debate in the profession. The title is quite provoking. Publishing as a prostitution, and the idea here is that sometimes the editors and referees have such heavy hand on affecting your article that they might lead you to get as long as you go along, lead you to produce an output which is so different from the output that you submitted and you wanted to publish, that looks like almost that you're selling your ideas. You are in a way close to a prostitution experience in terms of your finding. Obviously, as you might imagine, the title is pretty bold. Not always reality is so dark, but it gives you a flavor of how sometimes author independence might be affected. I think many of us may have casual experiences of some sorts of pull in one direction or in the other. In some journals in economics, this can be very heavy, and this can be very tough, in particular for junior scholars, when their career path is not yet fully defined, and so a small difference at the beginning may have a huge impact for the overall path, because there is a lot of path dependence in science, and so if you don't bend, for instance, and change your paper when you are under revision for a top 5, for instance, that might imply a huge difference in terms of your career, your salary, and where you end up, in 10 years' time after the publication of the paper. Okay, so this is to give you some ideas, some examples of the wedge that you can have between scientific ideas and the scientific practice. Okay, but this wedge sometimes creates difficulties that they have to face in the last, I would say, at least 15 years in particular, such as scientists and also in economics, and this is the issue of the alleged credibility crisis across scientists. And so the question that has been going around for a while is really, is there a credibility crisis? I put the crisis in inverted commas. The result is an active debate both among academics and popular press. So here I give you just an example of an influential article of a few years ago by the New Yorker. The truth were soft, and the note under the picture is showing scientists falling. The note says many results that are rigorously approved and accepted start shrinking in later studies. Okay, so that was, the punchline. Scholars not necessarily agree that we are witnessing a crisis, but definitely there are issues. Definitely there are challenges also for those who don't think that we have ever experienced a credibility crisis. Still, there is, we have discovered we are further away than we would like to be in terms of scientific practice from the ideas that we were discussing. And also this applies to the extent that science is self-correcting, and we had the opportunity to accumulate knowledge. Okay, so as the time passes, we learn more about the underlying truth in the world, the phenomena that we are interested to, and in many of the discussions that I have been able to follow with the years, one of the prominent issues would be always, for instance, for empirical research, if we rely too much on p-values by their own without, considering many other aspects that do affect, the constellation of stars in our regression tables or in our statistical tests. So, of course, I'm just giving you some flashes, some indications, more hints here and there. Science is much more complex than what I'm just presenting you. It's multidimensional, multifaceted, and so as always, what we can try to do is to try to put a little bit more structure to help our understanding without obviously pretending that this would be an exhaustive account of such a complex activity. Okay, so how do we put more structure? Well, we can use a very simple framework. For instance, to discuss the value, that is value, the learning, how much we learn about the underlying truth when we look at empirical science. And so, we can easily define the post-study probability that a research finding is true. So once the study has been implemented, the question is how much should I infer from the study? How much do I think that the effect that is reporting the study is indeed the true one, is indeed the one at work in the real world? And so this is a way of recasting the a very simple probability calculation. So we have beta, that is the typical study, 1 beta, that is the typical study power. Then we have tau, which is the search prior. You can imagine it as subjectively defined, or as somehow the relation between the number of two relations in that scientists are pursuing relative to the number of all possible relations in the real world, and then after the typical significance level in a test. And what you see reported here as post-study probability is nothing else than the amount of positive results that are indeed true over the amount of positive results that are indeed true plus the ones that we declare true, although they were not. So when we have an error in our inputs. So we can play around and, most prominently, Johnny and me, this has done so. Zach, myself, and John Lisa followed suit. We can play around with this formula, with this post-study probability, introduce, for instance, a few other elements to enrich the context and understand what factors affect it. And so what we can definitely say already by looking at the post-study probability definition is that research priors affect how likely is that the research finding is true, at least the assessment of a research finding being true. And in particular in economics, we think that having such a theory testing helps understanding, helps the assessment of the post-hydrology. So there's a question. Okay. Okay, so to the benefit of the people online, the question is, can you explain a bit more the research prior? You know, the research prior can be interpreted in many ways. You know, one way of interpreting it is that it's the subjective probability of a given relationship in the real world to be true. So suppose, you know, I know that X affects Y, and you know, in our community of scholars, of scientists, we think that's true. You know, if you want to put a little bit more structure, as we do in this paper, we typically assume that, you know, the prior is close to the ratio between the number of true relationships, so X, the whole X causes Y that are true, relative to all possible relations that scientists can study. So, you know, obviously it's a very subjective assessment, and we never, at least in our contribution, pin it down to a specific value. But what I think is interesting in the exercises that we do is to see how the post-study probability varies when you vary the prior. So it's about the ranges, it's about how plausible a range is in terms of understanding the relationship between two variables. Okay, so it's never about one specific prior, but it's looking at the variation of these priors, and when, you know, if you think that range is a plausible one for the type of research question you are addressing, then we are able to understand a little bit more what's the likelihood your study is indeed showing a true positive result. Yes, but I think you have microphones, right? Just to avoid me to repeat for the people online. So if you switch on those mics. Okay. Can you hear me now? It looks like it's working. Try again. Okay, so regarding fire,
these are the thorniest issue about using Bayesian inference. So, you know, it's the classical question. But there has been, I believe, a lot of progress in finding ways to approximate priors research questions, such as by use of community surveys, consensus, even prediction markets. So we can, as time grows, get a better flavor and less arbitrarily define prior probabilities for research questions, which is important for this approach. Thanks a lot for your question.
Okay, thanks, Zach. I think there was another contribution or question. Okay, very good. So, you know, I think, you know, there are many ways. I don't think there is one, you know, silver bullet. And this is why I think the emphasis needs to be more in understanding the range rather than pinning down a specific prior. Because, you know, some of the approaches that Zach has referred to, you know, might have some drawbacks, others have others. This clearly, you know, it's a complex issue, but, you know, I think it's debating about it that helps us to improve our understanding of where we stand in terms of the scientific contribution. So, you know, when there is some sort of structural theory that we are testing, you know, it's possible to show that there is a higher chances that the post-study probability will be higher, and the reason being that, you know, your testing has been guided and it's not, you know, an attempt of fishing, you know, casting the net wide to see which type of positive result you might get. Obviously, study power, I think that's less controversial, and sample size affects post-study probability. But we also see that, you know, there might be biases in the way we conduct our research, consciously or unconsciously, So conscious or unconscious bias may affect the post-study probability. So suppose I'm running an experiment, 5 minutes to go. Okay, so the time was 5. So did you say 45 minutes? Yes, it's let's try to. You know, I'm happy to follow the chair instruction, but you know, 45 minutes is in 8 minutes if we were to start on time. But let's make it 10 from now and then allow for 5 minutes. Okay. Just because I haven't called much. Okay, so there are issues in terms of bias, conflict of interest. We can show that even when there is research competition, this can negatively affect post-study probability when this is coupled with publication bias. And also, it's important to understand the frequency or repetitions in order to reduce uncertainty about the post-study probability. Okay, so there is evidence, in the social sciences that perhaps we have too few replications attempts in order to reduce the uncertainty about how the positive effects are. These are some examples of papers in sociology or the institutional sciences. There have been several initiatives over the years trying to assess what the replication rate. Here I'm putting a couple of them, one from psychology, the other one from economics. And unfortunately, to a certain extent, we always end up with a replication rate which is lower than we would like to have. This is the case then for psychology, but a certain extent for economics. In psychology, since replication were around 30% in economics, a little bit higher, but still below what you would expect to have a healthy science. So can economics help in understanding and improving our trust in the evidence? We think it can, and this by means of a series of featuring the economics approach to studying its subjects, so mathematical modeling, the use of experiments in the lab, but not just in the lab, and obviously the empirical tradition that we have in economics. But economics by its own, we think, cannot suffice. This is a complex endeavor, and so what we need is clearly cross-fertilization and explore the synergies and the complementarities between economics and other social sciences in order to make in order to accumulate more knowledge and to be able to distinguish what are the two effects from false positive. Okay, so now let's get to the what, and I apologize about the fact that I will speed up a bit now. So let's try to understand what we need to do. Well, we need to do a little bit more science of doing science. So this is something that philosophers of science has pondered for a long time. There's a recent movement that tries to put some quantitatively weights on our understanding of how we do science. And this movement relates to a new discipline, which is meta research, that tries to understand the research, how its practices and so on, by studying methods, reporting, reproducibility, evaluation, incentives, and so on and so forth. This involves many disparate topics, and this is also why it's important to have complementarity. It's why it's important to have many disciplines contributing to the research effort. And so these are some of the topics which I mentioned briefly. I don't have time to go into details, but let me just signaling that already the reflection has made important advancements, for instance, in the way we report research in different disciplines, has helped understand the importance of reproducibility, and so on and so forth. So, synopsis will enter in such an effort, and hopefully in meta research is a growing community. Synopsys will find itself in good company. Here some examples in the next presentations. I'm sure Zach and perhaps Adrian will give you more details. You know, these are three centers. I just picked these three metrics at Stanford, Institute for Replications, Montreal in Canada, and the Berkeley Initiative also in California, working in the area. And the question is how we want to do that. Well, I think there are possibilities to do small steps, as well as to go for a long march, so more ambitious projects. So the plan was to show you one particular research effort, which was coming from one of my contributions, which was published 2 years ago in Management Science. What we did here, we were trying to assess particular effect, which was demonstrated in the paper by Stuart Rains and Harris. The effect was that by changing the set of lotteries that people were choosing from, they were showing that they could move, in a way that estimated utility function, or in all economists, is the way how economists understand the choices of people, and they could shift them, from one side to the other just by changing the set of lotteries that participants were looking at. So this obviously was a very strong finding that would challenge the foundational economic principles. So we try to understand that if these effects were true, what their sources were, and we did so. So this is just demonstrating the type of effects. So if you have more positive skew distribution losses, you get this type of utility function estimate, or if you have negative skew, this is the opposite, and I can move you around just by changing the set of lotteries. Okay, so what we did, in the context of the controversy on reproducibility, we try to understand if the effect was replicable and robust, and what the origins were. How we did so, we did it through a series of small steps, quasi-adversarial collaboration. So part of the team, we were 3 economists and 4 psychologists, and one of the psychologists was part of the original team of researchers. We went to a series of steps, routine replication, so just replicating their data analysis, self-replication using their protocol, and run again on their study, conceptual replications, testing the same hypothesis with a different design, and then we had a very rich data set, and we ran a composite analysis that, in a way, you can imagine it to be as an internal of our meta-analysis. Okay, so what we learned? Well, we learned that the effect is reliable and reproduced, but also that it's not necessarily the fact that in a way the preferences are very erratic. What we are getting is a mix of the choices set, the model that used to test those, and so on. So obviously we clearly understood that there are issues sourcing now in model choice, but the right model is still an elusive feature. But we learned a lot also about meta research, and we learned how there is multiplicity of perspectives and dimensions in this endeavor. Okay, so these are small steps. We can move towards bigger steps to try to understand how much a finding can be generalized to other contexts horizontally or vertically, so scaled up. So from a small study with small numbers to a large intervention. What we see in general that's happening is that there is, what our co-author John Lee says is the voltage effect. So when you scale up, the effect becomes smaller and smaller in reality. Okay, so you see a big effect in one study, then when you go to the field, it becomes very small. Okay, so we have tried to put again some structure using the post-study probability framework. And what we see is that this happens often because there is low reproducibility. So, this voltage effect, this loss of the size of the effect when you move from the original study to the environment happens because of low reproducibility, because there is heterogeneity in the population, the context between the original study and the target intervention, the target environment, and there is multidimensionality. So there are many aspects in each intervention. There are many auxiliary hypotheses that you need to do in order to run the study. Okay, so I'm almost there. So there is evidence also of linear generalizability in when we use findings from academic literature and then apply it in the real world. This is the case for nudges, which are behavioral insights that inform policymaking, and nudges are typically just changing the choice architecture, not the incentives, not other key elements. And we see again that there is a voltage effect in nudges. Okay, so what we want to do in the future also in synopsis is to try to understand how we can improve with this respect. And so, we want to start emulating tools that are, for instance, in use in the medical literature in order to measure the closeness of experimental and targeted to real world context. So, an experiment is done within controlled conditions, for instance, in a ward, in an hospital, and then the question is how can we extend it to all hospitals, in the daily practice, and this may have its own challenges. And the question is how much, the data from the experiment helps us to understand what will happen in the real world. And so they have constructed a tool that, put more structure left to understand this. And the ambition here is, we are already working in order to emulate this approach for social sciences. Okay, so I think if we manage to build more of this, we will be able to really be in a position to have, clearly, more robust studies. We could show that there is more a higher post-study probability, and this will lead the persuasion of policymakers and also the possibility to have, empirically informed policies for social impact. Okay, and so this is to a certain extent what we are trying to do with this exercise of emulating a practice tool in the domain of social science. Okay, so I'm almost done. You can breathe in 30 seconds. I can breathe too. I think the last 7 minutes has been a bit of a rush, and sorry about that. But in this sense, we can and we should, advance meta research in order to provide methodological improvements for each user study. So also in the small steps, every one of us is involved in user studies, and we can make a difference already there. But we can also work towards instigating institutional changes in order to improve reproducibility and therefore develop tools to help us generalize and scale our research findings. Okay, let me wrap up. So we cannot take trust in science for granted. Science is clearly a complex endeavor. There are many challenges. We need nuanced solutions. There is no silver bullet, no one size fits all. Okay, and obviously we are not alone in this attempt. We should try to work closely and cooperate with policymakers, stakeholders in the society, in order to be able to affect the environment in a positive way. And so we should be also aware of things as, for instance, the risk of populism influences in the communication. And I don't know if you've spotted from my accent, I'm Italian. Yesterday were the elections, in Italy, although, outside I live in the UK, don't get me started, but it's something that we should be more involved in. Okay, thanks. I hope I didn't use of your time. Back to you, Zach.
Yeah, so I might take a little bit of less time from my presentation, so we could have a little bit of a discussion here to get things a little bit more lively. So maybe one thing that I would like to discuss and maybe give the floor first to you by asking a question. How would you see the role of different disciplines in the problem of improving the credibility of science? The way we see it together, and you can elaborate on that, is it's a scientific problem to understand a particular set of behaviors and norms within a particular human institution, which is science. And it can be studied by tools of science, not only social science, but also physical and biomedical science. And this is sort of a central view behind the synopsis. So we think that, for instance, economics has specific tools that can be used to study this question scientifically. But synopsis is also primarily addressed to non-economists who would like to work with us, collaborate with us, and try to understand how tools from their respective discipline helps with the problem. So in our group synopsis, we also have the psychologists on top of economists, and but I'm making it a little bit of a statement instead of a question. How would you see it, Fabio? Can you say a few things about how you have been inspired by work in other disciplines in tackling this problem?
So again, to the benefit of those online, the question is if I can elaborate a bit more on what has inspired us to from other disciplines and their contribution to meta research, in that at least myself and Zach, we have clearly an economics background. And so I think, although there are similarities in the way we do science across disciplines, there are also specificity and diversities. But there is also richness in terms of the methodological approaches. And my attitude has always been that in order to be sure that a phenomenon is indeed true, you are much safer to make such a statement if you can address it from different perspectives using different methodological approaches, and those all point towards the same directions. And so I think we as economists in the past have been accused to, and perhaps rightly so, to colonialize other disciplines. But I think for economists, there's a lot to learn from other disciplines too. So there's maturity in the biomedical science about understanding of how you can learn from multi-level studies. There is important learning from the psychological science about how you need to approach the experimentation and how you need to guard against false positive. But there is also a possibility for economics to contribute, and we think, for instance, that the ability of working mechanism design, understanding how institutions can be structured, and what is what economists refer to as partial equilibrium or equilibrium properties are important. So when you make a change in one small context, this can have a knockdown effect on other aspects. And so these clearly create a fertile ground for collaborations. I think will be very much part of the synopsis attempt.
Okay, very good. So any other questions?
The list of things in my class.
Do you want to use the microphone? I think you have a good microphone.
And if you put up the accusation, working that biases and things that you do not expect certain things. Would you, validating a certain research field as being, sound, would make it less likely for you to publish. The second part is, if you think that there is an issue in the field that may sound true, what I said, can you use the tools of that we produce in a self respect, in a self to correct a little bit of the biases that this meta science approach may have, for example. So I don't know it very well, but for example, having to do research in an almost contractual way, for example, getting your inspiration from medicine, have everything ready a priori and then follow through the original plan. Is that really better science? Won't we be missing the opportunities for accidental discoveries that will let you expand in unexpected directions and reach, something better, for example? So, there are bound to be shortcomings in this approach. And can some of the tools that you are introducing be used to guard against this shortcoming?
Okay. So I'm mindful of time, so I'll try to be brief, but if you are unsatisfied with my answer, I'm happy to discuss more at margins or just come back. So I think science is complex, and I think there isn't a silver bullet. So you need to use different tools, and in reality, often you need more judgment rather than less. So are there tools that can help us? Yes, but again, if you only then rely on these tools, and in particular on one tool always, you're very likely to be off track. So tools help, but they are not, an objective, an aim on its own. And this is why it's important, we as academic community, we are alerted, we are ready, and it's costly to exert effort and judgment, but that's the way to go if we really want to assess and work with, true positive effects rather than, quite a crowded number of false positive. I don't know if I addressed your question.
Yeah. For example, the paper in Management Science before we not be published if it found that the effect was not there.
Well, we can argue about that. So, in a sense, in reality, in that period, was easier to publish a negative finding, so a negative replication rather than a positive one. So, in reality, it was a completely opposite that atmosphere. So, it would have been easier to show that. But that I think that experience in terms also of the referee report, it has been quite unique with the referees even praising us for the effort. Remember, for instance, that was an adversarial collaboration. So we had one of the original authors in the team, and if you read the paper, there are points where we explicitly say that we disagree. So there is a paragraph where we say, well, part of the team thinks this is the case, part of the team says no, this is not, and you can get how we split on the topic. Yes, sir.
So first of all, generally, you don't want to be too much of a contrarian because making enemies is not a good idea. So usually it's a problem rather than an advantage of being contrarian. In terms of publication bias in meta science itself, of course, it's part of research. So meta science, of course, is subject to the same bias that we are studying. So with what you refer to, you are only ready for us to do more reviews and our own studies to be registered in the sense that we're not only prey to that publication bias to look for positive or negative results depending on the flavor of the day. So I would tend to agree with that point. This meta-analysis itself biased. There has been evidence that this is indeed the case, and meta-analysts make suggestions. For instance, probably Ioannidis analysis found that meta-analysis itself is probably pretty sure that Adrian is going to speak quite in detail about that. So meta-analysis is also working about its own problems and issues. And again, going to the point of being contrarian, it's a little bit of a sensitive thing. So there has to be an etiquette in how one does things, because things can become often personal, and this generates more heat than light. So that's also another thing to consider how we should be appropriately, doing things with the appropriate etiquette. But this is an issue being discussed later. And finally, in the issue of flexibility versus, rigor and pre-registration, this is an open question, and itself is a meta-research question, and the tool of economic studies cost-benefit analysis could have a model to consider this. I mean, I remember some literature actually on the top of my head about this question: how much pre-registration do we want versus accidental discovery, and how do we optimally do it? Again, this is a part of meta-analysis itself. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. So there's another question. You want me to take it, or we can move to the next? Okay. Do you mind to use the microphone if it works? Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm not very familiar with this field. So I will explain my questions in social sciences. Quite often, it's entirely impossible to follow the scientific paradigm. You say that you design research for the study, and then you just follow all the milestones in the field in which we complete data set, to analyze and get their results. For example, we have designed a study to investigate the effects of flooding to social societies, to societies in Cyprus. And we used the maps of the water companies to get the neighborhoods which have experienced flooding, big floods. But when we went there, we realized that it wasn't so simple, because people will tell you, this area here hasn't experienced floods to you, because just knock on that door over there, and we will tell you what to do. And then knock on that door, and they tell you, it's not our about it, but you need to talk to Mrs. Kelly, the person of the law. And then, but there's a bridge over there, and then. So I don't know to which extent we can be flexible with those tools and accommodate calculations, the degree to which different social science studies really benefit from what they originally planned. And then there is this accidental finding and rigor, and sometimes you just put that.
So thanks. So I think you touch upon important elements. So also there is quite a lot of heterogeneity within the social sciences in the way how we do empirical work, and the type of data that we use, the way how we approach and test hypotheses. And so, again, it's not that there is the same type of meta research that works in all subfields. But as a researcher, you will always have a lot of degree of freedom, and those degree of freedom, consciously or unconsciously, might affect your findings, And so there is always room to probe them, to drill down, understand more how much what you're reporting is indeed corresponding to the truth. And so, for instance, if you think about just having, you were discussing issues of how the data is generated and so on. But even if you have, observational data, and we abstract from the data generation process, already there are so many degrees of freedom that it's not necessarily the case that always the result has been reported is indeed the one reflecting the true underlying phenomenon. And for instance, imagine how many ways there are for analyzing the same data set. So you could run thousands of regressions, and some will, by definition, be significant, others won't. Which one do you pick? Which one is the one representing, your domain of investigation better? And these are questions that the scientists will need to post our steps, and the more we cover ground in this respect, the less uncertain there is about how truthful is the finding that the output that we are presenting. I don't know if Zach wants to add anything.
Yeah, I think that's a nice point. There has been, in my opinion, less progress in figurization and vigorous, tying the hands of researchers, less so in the observation of studies than the experimental studies, and for good reason. But I think many of the concepts of reproducibility have been generally more well suited to experimental work than observational work, at least as far as I can tell. So I think this is a valid point in the area of active research. So what do you do, with observational work and again potentially an infinite number of empirical specifications that can be used. So I think in terms of yes,
Good morning.
Morning.
Sorry, I just arrived from.
You didn't miss class.
No, sure I did. But I had some experience on issues of reproducibility with observational studies where you can isolate one part of the observation study and try to replicate it. And I remember two projects. One was take a study that has been conducted in a certain way and find another one in the literature that is pretty similar in terms of data collection and measures, and analyze it in the same way that the original study was analyzed and see if you still get the same effect. So it's still against data from the field using questionnaires or observations. But with different data in a different setting, different country. The second example is when we have an existing study with open data, and you can check whether the decisions for data cleaning, deletion of traces, as well as the analysis procedure, whether you as an expert analyst would reach the same results as the observational stuff. So you cannot really get creatives exactly and do the same observational study, but you could do it with their study with existing data or directly with the analysis.
Yesterday, Fabio mentioned a service actually in France, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a service mainly within economics and perhaps management. In France, I think I'm sure for French-based researchers, but I'm not sure about the rest of the world, is free of charge at the moment, and so you can send your paper with your data, and they have a team of replicators, and they will replicate your data analysis and so on. and see that indeed what you write in the paper corresponds to what is in the data, and they will issue a certificate. Obviously, it's what is called routine replication or computational replication. So they use your do files and your set of commands to run the replications on, but still it's already a step in the right direction, because often in the past there were a lot of mistakes or discrepancy between the data and the lifespan and what was reported in the paper, and this is one step to fix it. And just last 5 seconds, in the research process there are many phases, before the value generation process, then the analysis and so on, and there is room to do meta science at each of these stages, and any can benefit to our understanding of the underlying phenomena. So it's not just the registration, it's not just replication, but many of these together may help us to move towards the right equilibrium.